All right. Well, first of all, Jenny, I just have to say thank you so much for trusting us with your book. And for everyone listening back, my name is Madison. I work with Calipress, and we were the publishers fortunate enough to work with her on her book, The Dreamer, and the even greater fortune to work with her on her next book in this series, which she'll talk more about soon. But I just want to congratulate you on release day. That is such a fun milestone in any book journey. And I like to say it's a big day. It's a very big day in the writing journey, but it's only the beginning. And I totally believe that for you. It's only the beginning of all the wonderful things God is going to do and all the things He's going to teach through your book. But I would love just to kind of give you the floor if there's any words that you would like to say, just about your book and on this day, and yeah, just what you have on your heart.
Yeah, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for just taking a moment to celebrate the launching of this sweet book into the world. That's a sweet day to kind of reflect on God's faithfulness and bringing this from an idea into actual copy that you can hold in your hand. So I'm so grateful to kind of just reflect on God's faithfulness today and grateful for those who will get to read it, and because that's who I wrote it for families and young families, just to get a chance to step into God's plan for the nations to know and worship Him. So I'm just excited to see how the Lord will use that, and grateful just for the honor and opportunity to work with Cala Press on this project. It's been a joy, and so I'm just looking forward to seeing how the Lord will continue to work. And so it's just a sweet day to celebrate.
Yeah, I love that. It's definitely such an important and needed message in today's world, and just so formative for kids as they grow up with all these different worldviews. Well, we are to my favorite part of all of these things, and it's hearing you read your book. So yeah, I would love just to hear you do your live reading, and yeah, I just can't wait to hear this book in your voice.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump a little ahead in the book to chapter 4. And so that's after the brothers Jason and Fred have already gotten the game and been given their mission to give a holy book to a dreamer. And so they've already landed in Afghanistan. And so this is just the first half of chapter 4, titled Prayer. Jason didn't stop running until he reached Fred and the small group of soccer players at the edge of the village. He was glad to be away from the mysterious robed person. Jason rubbed his sweaty palms along the sides of his long shirt. He stood beside his brother, Fred's eyes fixed on the group of boys standing several steps away from them. The four soccer boys stood shoulder to shoulder, with black and white checkered scarves spread across the dirt in front of them. They bent at the waist, kneeled, and touched their foreheads to the scarves. They sat up on their knees, mumbled words, and extended palms to the sky. "What are they doing?" Jason whispered to his little brother. "I think they're praying," Fred said, not taking his eyes off the group. When the boys finished praying, they rose, picked up their scarves, and formed a circle around the brothers. The same dark-haired boy who took a shot uncle appeared to be the spokesman for the group. "Salam. Peace to you." The boy touched his right hand to his heart. "We can understand what he's saying," Jason thought. He shot a shot, looked at his brother. "From what I can tell," Fred whispered, "the game lets us understand each other when talking, but not reading another language." Jason raised his eyebrows. "Wow. How are you doing? How's your health? How's your family?" the boy continued. "These sure are a lot of questions," Jason thought. "Are we supposed to answer all of them?" "We're fine, thanks." Jason's voice filled with uncertainty. Fred leaned toward his big brother. "Maybe we should ask him a question." Fred looked at the soccer leader. "How are you?" The boy grinned and nodded. "I'm Abdul Rahman, but you can call me Rahman." "I'm Jason." He copied the boy and placed a hand across his heart. "And this," he added, nodding toward his brother, "is Fred." "Are you Muslim?" A soccer player next to Rahman blurted out. He crossed his arms and narrowed his brown eyes at the brothers. Rahman elbowed the other boy and shook his head. "Where are you from?" Rahman asked. His midnight black hair was sweaty from the soccer game. Jason didn't want to mention where they lived. He nibbled on his thumbnail. How they landed here in a faraway country didn't make sense. But his question did seem like a fair one. Would these boys be okay with strangers from another country? "Far from here," Jason answered in an uneasy voice. "We're from the United States of America." A flurry of upbeat words exploded from the soccer boys. Jason and Fred couldn't understand what was said. Everyone was talking at the same time. Rekmon held up his hands to silence the group. Mashallah, God has done it, the soccer boy leader cried. That is far. Where is your family? They, they let us explore, Jason stammered, shifting his feet. After all, his parents did say they could play the game. But to the ends turned out to be more than just a board game. What if they couldn't finish their mission? What would his parents do if they couldn't find him and Fred? He tried to push the worry aside. Fred watched his brother carefully. We're visiting for the day, he added. So are you Muslim? Rekman asked, his eyebrows pulled together in curiosity. A boy draped an arm over Rekman's shoulder. The group leaned in closer. Jason paused before answering. Would these boys be upset over the truth? Maybe strangers weren't welcome here. No, we're Christians, he said, holding his breath. A collective gasp from the Afghan boys filled the air. We've never met someone who isn't Muslim, Rekman said. Our fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers are all Muslim. We have lived in this village our entire lives. A grin spread across his face. His brown eyes turned playful. Come eat lunch with me. I would be honored to have you as my guest. A boy put his hand on Jason's arm. We're all Muslim. Jason tried to step back, but bumped into another soccer player. Why aren't you? Another boy asked, standing face to face with Fred, an eyebrow arched in confusion. His younger brother's face paled. Do you believe Mohammed, peace be upon him, was a prophet? A soccer player asked. Repeat after me, another boy called. There is. Jason's heart raced as at the rapid fire questions. Rekman stepped between the soccer players and the brothers. Our guests aren't from Afghanistan. He put his hands on his hips. Still, a soccer player said, shrugging his shoulders, they should become Muslim like us. There is no law against foreigners being Christian, Rickman said. The brothers exchanged worried looks. Then Jason remembered. It was illegal for an Afghan to follow Jesus. But it sounded like it was okay for him and Fred to be Christian since they weren't from here. These are our guests. We honor guests. No? Regman looked at the boys, daring them to contradict him. All the boys cast downward glances, pink dusting their cheeks. We must go eat lunch now. Rickman stood straight and crossed his arms. May you go in God's peace. Rickman waited until the small group of boys dispersed to their own homes. Jason let out a sigh of relief. Thank you, Rickman. Any time, Rickman said. You're our guest here. He motioned for the brothers to follow him. Come, friends, let's go eat. I'd like that, Fred said. I'm so hungry. He and Fred followed as Rickman led the way to his house. And I'll end it there.
Oh, it is so fun to hear that in your voice. You have a great reading voice, first of all.
Thanks.
Um, but I just love your book so much. It just has all those qualities of books that I loved reading when I was younger. And it is so rich, just so rich, especially hearing it in your voice and just reading. Um, yeah, just so rich. And I can't wait to kind of learn more about how you did that, how you made a book that way. So I'd love just to ask a few questions if you are fine with that.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah, well, first, I'd love to know what inspired this story.
Yeah, so I think stepping back, the idea to kind of write a series on this topic came. My oldest son is now in sixth grade. Back when he was, if you rewind back to when he was in first grade, we were reading an obscene amount of chapter book series. And so we were just devouring them. And, chapter books obviously aren't as long as middle grade books. And so we would go through them a lot faster, even if they had a large series. But we also began to notice that there weren't that many Christian chapter book series. There were a lot more of the next level up called middle grade, which is like thicker, 35,000 words to 50,000 words that are thicker. But chapter books in that 10 to 15,000 range, there really weren't that many Christian chapter books. And I was hoping, I love reading books of all types, but I was hoping to have more Christian chapter books to add into our mix of reading. And there just seemed like there was a little bit of a lack of that. And then at the same time as well, I was really trying to grow and figuring out how to take my kids along in this desire to pray for the nations. In other words, cultivating this heart that God has for the world to know and worship Him and kind of wanting to bring them into that through prayer, but just finding that there really weren't a lot of great resources for kids that could do that in a real fun and engaging way for kids. And so that that was something that I was looking for and was finding that it was hard to find that. And so those two things kind of came together in my mind as like, what if I could write sort of a magic treehouse style book with God's heart for the nations? And what if I could just create a chapter book series that blends those two ideas together? And so that's sort of where that initial inspiration came from, just from realizing like I should just write the resource that I want for my kids. And so that's sort of where the idea came from. Why I'm so passionate, though, about this idea of God's name to be known and worshiped among nations. It's just from my time I lived and worked overseas for 6 years with conservative Muslims, and 4 of those years were spent where this first book is based, Afghanistan. And so part of that is also just from my own kids. My oldest he spent the first 2 years of his life in Afghanistan, but at the beginning of the book, in the dedication, part of that is just I wanted my boys to catch a glimpse of why we love this land and people. And in that, I wanted to give other people a chance to kind of see that same beauty, and kind of get a glimpse into that beauty and that I wanted my boys to see. I wanted others to have a chance to kind of sit in with us and kind of soak in that as well. And so that was sort of the inspiration for this, was just this desire for people to really get to find ways to connect as families into that. And I felt like fiction was the best way to sort of capture the imaginations of young readers and families, because that's what it does for me and my family. And so I just felt this was a really, just like we have historical fiction, I just felt like we needed something that wasn't just a biography of missionaries. We needed something that brought us into these stories in a real imaginative way that sort of built connection to these worlds rather than sort of isolation from them.
That is so beautiful. It sounds like God just brought together the perfect fusion of your experiences and what you were passionate about, and just seeing that gap and saying, well, this is what I love, and this is what I would love to see more of. And I just love how God brought those two things together and said, hey, Jenny, why don't you write this book? And I guess you were talking about the Magic Treehouse series and specifically just about series. Obviously, this is just the first book in your To the End series. Did you always know that it was going to be a series, or did you start with the first book and then you just kind of, the idea grew from there?
Yeah, I think just because sort of like I was talking about, I thought of chapter books mostly in sort of series chunks because they're shorter than like a typical middle grade book. So for me, I think from the beginning, the idea was to kind of walk families through the initial concept was to walk through the five major world views outside of Christianity, which are Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, animism, and unreligious. Those are some of the biggest religions outside of Christianity in the world. And so my heart was sort of to invite families to step into learning about those worldviews from a Christian perspective so that they could see some of that beauty, but then also see the need for gospel transformation and sort of develop that heart to maybe want to pray after having met these characters on the pages of a book that might spark some prayer for that part of the world and seeing how God uniquely works there. And so that was sort of with that. When I started with this first book, I knew I wanted to start with what I most knew, but my heart was really just that I wanted this to be a series if it could be. But I also knew, in the publishing world, that sometimes series aren't always a given. And so I wanted it to be able to stand alone on its own so that it could just be a standalone book if it needed to be. But the heart was always, I had this vision to try to at least walk through those five world religions, and making the boys go on that journey to learn how God works in those cultures in different ways than in America.
Well, obviously, we're a little bit biased as your editor, but I think it was a great idea. And I love that we get to work on these first two books of your series, because it's just such a needed message. I think so important. And I think even which is what all great children's literature does. It's something that also brings the parents along and adults who can get something from it as they're teaching their children. And so I love that you were able to do that. Like I said, even in your first book, I was reading it and just saying, oh my goodness, I'm learning so many things. Like, what a gift. And I just think all children's books should be that way. We should be able to get something from it too. And I think you did such a great job of doing that and of representing the culture as well. And I know obviously you said you had some experience in Afghanistan, but I know even beyond drawing from your knowledge, you also went through a lot of steps to make sure that this was representing the culture accurately and the land accurately. So I'd love just to hear what your process looked like of writing this book and making sure that it kind of ticked all those boxes of being really respectful and communicating what you thought was important.
Yeah, and I think so before I kind of walk through the practical side of sort of what some of that looked like, I will say part of that foundation, like from the get-go of even having this vision sort of laid on my heart, was this idea that I really wanted to make sure that I was respectfully portraying a culture that's not my own. And I didn't, and so there's these dynamics when you talk about writing in a different culture of, if you're not from that culture, um, I can't write a main character that's like from that culture, which is why the intentionality is that these are American boys that are stepping into what God is doing in these different cultures. So to have that be there, but part of that idea for just really wanting to communicate that respect about other cultures as we approach them is just sometimes I've read books like if where these American characters or Western we'd say characters step into a culture, and sometimes I didn't feel like it was always done very respectfully, whether they realized it or not. And so I wanted just to make sure that it would be done well. But some of the reason why I felt that that was so important is if you go back to when I was overseas, before I was married, one of my the supervisors was author Nick Ripken. And so for those of you who don't know him, he's a missionary, but also he's written several books, including one called The Insanity of God. And him and his wife have basically spent their entire lives essentially just interviewing people from the persecuted church and so learning about what their stories and how they follow God and what it looks like to have faith in Jesus in hard places. And so he would, when we were there, he would invest in a lot of us that were on the field with him at that time in the Horn of Africa. And we learned so much about the persecuted churches. They would give workshops and teach us, and really just their love for Jesus and cultivating his worthiness and how much we have to learn from other cultures and other like other believers who have come out of other world religions, stepped into Christianity and are following Jesus, that there was so much we had to learn about what it means to follow Jesus from them. That really laid like such a solid foundation for me in my early 20s, that was just my understanding was like, I have so much to learn. And so I think that is a healthy way to look at the global church, is understand we have so much to learn from each other. And so I think that is at the heart of this book, of really understanding that that's a difficult thing to do well. And so really basking this whole project in a lot of prayer that God would really help me to do that. Obviously, for this first book, having lived in Afghanistan for 4 years and learning language and culture, that's a huge advantage to a good starting place for something. And obviously during that time, I as my language got more advanced, I was being able to hear life stories of women. And so I would just for years get to hear stories after story after story after story, and then hear people who had been in Afghanistan for a long time, maybe from the West, and get to hear their stories of different things, of how God worked in that culture. And from my own experience of seeing God work in that culture, there was just ample opportunities for me to have learned so much, to say how God uniquely might be working in that place. So those, all those experiences come together. But even after having been there and listened, and even before I went over there, I was reading books on the history, and I was learning about this part of the world in a lot of different ways of just learning history and learning different things that have been done and haven't been done and what things look like there now. Those all were helpful in laying that foundation. But when I came back and wanted to try to dive into this book, I had to stop and think like, where am I lacking? And so if you're trying to write something, where is this going to be? How is this different from other parts? And so even then I would have to kind of dive in and do research and be like, okay, so is this where these flowers would be? Like you're constantly pulling in research to make sure that you are kind of accurately portraying things from the detail standpoint, but also making sure that how you're representing that feels respectful and on target. So I would pull in a near culture believer to read through this book and say, okay, you read through it and you tell me, is there anything that feels off, that doesn't resonate with you? And so I can get feedback from someone who is a believer that has come from that culture or nearby culture and can give me feedback to say, yes, this is respectful, or this is off a little bit here or there. Especially with as my other books come on, I get more and more people who cultural beta readers to give me feedback to make sure that I'm staying on target, and doing that in a respectful way, but also that still feels authentic to them. And so that was my main goal, and that was so important to me. And so that this whole project has just been vast in prayer and really trusting the Lord to guide my steps as I do that research and as I get feedback, to make sure that those are something that is authentic and respectful.
That's so good. I think people can look at a smaller book and say, oh, this must have been easy to do, but that's just not true at all. So much work goes into every single book. And especially your book. I mean, just the depth of what you've done, the research and your experience, it just really shows in the dreamer. And this is a writer question, but what would you suggest to anyone who does find themselves in a place where they need to do research, or maybe they know they're lacking in one area of experience? What would you recommend to them? Because obviously you just have such great experience kind of going down that path.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on the timeline. If for me, as much as possible, I mean, my favorite thing though, if you're talking about basic research, I know I was doing a kid's book, but some of my favorite things, especially when I moved into the second book, was checking out kids' books on these cultures because they kind of keep them simple and to the point, but they're really rich in information. And so for me, I know I'm writing a kid's book, but I feel like it sort of takes things and really kind of gets to the heart of things really quickly, and you don't get lost in these side tangents. You can be like, no, I'm learning specifically about this, and you can get quality research books that are kind of geared towards kids but really provide good stuff. And then you still pull in the adult books, but I feel like that's one of my favorite things was pulling in the kids books, because the kids research kind of based books, because they were just really helpful in ways that like the adult books sometimes felt like a bit too much. But it was helpful in that. But also for me, I think really interviewing multiple people. So from that culture. So if I'm asking a question about how God uniquely works in a culture, I'm not just asking one person and saying, okay, that's good. That like looking for people that you can actually like real people that you can have conversations that should know more than you about what's going on in that culture. And as much as possible, trying to get those live interviews, I feel like are really important to kind of helping get perspective and shape things. Because someone might say one thing, but then you talk to someone else and you realize, okay, well, that's how they see it. But actually, maybe it's a little more like, and you get more perspectives to kind of help you give a more balanced view. Not that what someone says wasn't true, but when you're writing a book, you're trying to just kind of narrow in and just do your best to kind of hold out what's to the best of your knowledge, sort of what is the best bit to be displayed in a book. So for me, those real interviews with people to try to lean into trying to do that is also helpful. I don't know if that answered your question, but those are some things that are helpful for me, I think, as I was doing my own research.
Yeah, those are good words. And I think that will be so helpful because I feel like I see so many writers struggling with the research piece. I mean, it
Yeah,
just can be a little bit overwhelming to tackle that, even if they feel called to write what they're writing about.
totally.
So those are great words for sure. Well, I
Yeah,
know
and I
you,
would say too, real quick, at a different library before a few years ago, we also just had great librarians. And so if I had it, like it wasn't even for this book, it was for a different thing that I was researching. And if I had a very specific thing, I just have librarians who are like champions of helping me get, hey, I need something about this time period and like this thing, and they are so great at like helping you get exactly, if you don't know how to navigate it yet, there are librarians who probably are just like so thrilled if you would just ask them how to find the exact right book that you're looking for. I mean, I guarantee it. Like, there's going to be a librarian who would be thrilled to help you find just the right book that there's not access to or something. So, I would encourage you to that as well, like to lean into your librarians because they are excellent researchers, most of them.
yeah, that is great advice and probably something that you wouldn't really think of as well.
Yeah.
So I love that. Um, well, I know you kind of talked a little bit about how you found it hard to find those resources to really bring kids along on that journey um, of missions and spreading the gospel. So, what would you recommend to parents who are looking to get their kids more involved just in that world of missions and trying to teach them about how to spread the gospel and to pray for the nations?
Yeah, I think for me, it always goes back to like the foundation that we're laying. And so the key theme for this book series and for is Isaiah 49:6, where it says, it is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to bring back the preserved of Israel. I will make you as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. And so, in this verse, God is essentially talking to the Israelites and saying it's just too small. It's too small that just one people group knows and worships me. And we know, like John Piper sort of reminds us that God's most glorified in us and when we're most satisfied in him. But it's this idea that like there are places around the globe that God's not getting the glory he deserves. And because he cares about it, we should care about it. And so it's this idea that we get to go and be a light. And one of the best ways we get to be a part of that is we think of kids and young families who, maybe just can't pick up and, grab their passports and go somewhere. But I think just from our own living rooms, from our cars, from, the church pickup lines, while we're waiting to pick up our kids from children's ministry or something, there are opportunities that we can lean in to pray. And so I think that's my heart is like when we understand that this is important to God, we can just show our kids this is it. This is meaningful way that we can contribute. It's not the only way, but it's a meaningful way that we as a family can contribute to what God cares about, and making his name known in places where it's not. And so some practical things, I think what that looks like, and a lot of them sort of kind of always point back to prayer. One is just finding a specific time to pray. I think a lot of times we think, well, I don't have time to add one more thing. But really, if you just sort of look at these pockets of time that you have and just find a consistent time that you can say, okay, on Sunday lunches, we're going to pray for, for this specific people group or for this specific country or this specific missionary, but to say on Sundays at lunches or on Thursdays before bedtime or on Tuesdays on the way to soccer practice or wherever you have those moments, going to school on Mondays, whatever time window that you think, this is a moment where we can take a couple minutes and pray. I think the best thing is just to cultivate that habit and just say, this is when we're going to do it. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but I think it's those tiny habits that add up to big, kind of life-shaping habits in our own lives to kind of join in what God's doing. The second thing is there, you can invite international students over to your homes for a meal, and then your families get to interact with someone from this culture, ask questions, learn about it, and hopefully that builds a connection too. And then and you as a family can talk about, well, what areas can we pray for this culture after kind of learning about it and interacting with someone from a different culture. So it sort of gives us this experience to invite someone in. A lot of times I forget the statistics really high and I don't know what it currently is, but like most international students do not get invitations to other people's houses. Like most international students wish an American would invite them to their house. Why not it be you, the Christians, right? So I just encourage you. Most international students are actually really want to be invited into homes. So this is a great opportunity. Yeah, I could share some funny stories about how that doesn't always go as you plan with young kids, but I really invite you to lean into that, even in the imperfection of it, because it's a great way to kind of be a part of what God's doing. Third, my favorite probably is to read books about other cultures. And so that's called international children's literature, but essentially just books based in other cultures. And sometimes that can feel a little intimidating to know how to pick that out. But if you're already reading aloud with your kids at any point, it would just be wonderful to fold in some books about other cultures into your reading with your kids. And then you can talk about it and figure out bridges like what's beautiful about this culture, but what areas need gospel transformation. And on my blog, I sort of review some international books, international kidlit books that I've read and sort of give overviews so your family can kind of think, oh, would this be a good one for our family to try out or not? So those are just, I think, great opportunities to kind of foster a connection to other cultures and sort of spark prayer as well. And then finally, the obvious one is just to adopt a missionary from your church, right? So sign up for their newsletters, read them together, pray for them as a family. When they're coming back to visit, invite them to a meal and talk with them. When my husband and I were overseas and we came back, there was this family that just read every newsletter we sent, prayed for us. We invited them over. Those kids and that family asked us some of the best questions of anybody because they were tracking with everything that we gave in our newsletters and they were praying and they were excited. And it was really beautiful to see how God was using their hearts to partner alongside us for the gospel in their prayers. And so I really say like it does matter. And it's a really beautiful thing to get to do as a family together. So those are kind of some four simple ways that might work to consider folding into your family's rhythms in the coming months.
I think what I love most about everything you said is that it's actionable and it's achievable. I think sometimes we can look at something just as like zoomed way out and say, wow, this is so overwhelming. I don't even know where to start. And then we don't do anything, but we don't realize how prayer, intentional prayer, and just those small steps that seem maybe insignificant to us really mean something and really make a difference for us and for children. Um, I just love everything that you shared and just the ways that you broke that down and said, look, it is possible and it doesn't have to be some crazy thing. Like you said, we're not grabbing our passports and going somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just really love that. And I'm sure that has come from some hard-won experience as well.
Yeah, totally. And just realizing like it is, I think we all feel so busy. And I think, when I was in my 20s and I was at a church and I was talking to one of our actually the global pastor at a church, and he was like, I think a lot of times people think if I can only do discipleship this one way and do it this big grand thing, then I can't do it at all. And he's just like, what time do you have? and what can you do with the time God's given you. And it won't always be these big grandiose ideas that you have. Sometimes you have to think, what is actually something that I could do to be obedient to this? And it doesn't have to be grand sometimes. So God really honors ordinary faithfulness.
Those are good words for all areas of life.
Yes.
Well, I would love to know, as my last question, what's the main takeaway that you hope kids or adults get from reading your book?
Yeah, and I think I've touched on it a lot, but my main heart for this was just that people would sort of catch the warmth and beauty of Afghan culture, to kind of not let fear be the main note that people hear when they think about Afghanistan, but instead maybe let their note be curiosity and that connection to a culture that might feel different than our own, and may that. And then as a result, my hope is that that sort of sparks prayer for Afghans, and this desire to kind of step into that. In a new way because you feel a better connection to that part of the world, having met some of these characters, but also to truly understand that prayer really is the work. You know, Oswald Chambers says prayer doesn't fit us for greater work. Prayer is the greater work. And I think it's really hard to sometimes really latch on and understand how important that is. And so my hope is just sort of that people, that families and that kids can just be like, I can be a part of what God wants to do. And this is meaningful way that I can be a part of this. And so that's sort of my heart too, is just that that would really spark prayer for the nations among families as they see their role in God's global plan.
I love that. That's amazing. Well, I think you've done an amazing job at definitely sparking that curiosity, even for me, as an adult, just reading your story. And like you said, I just not having the fear. I think there is some of that fear sometimes. And so I love that in the way that you seem to do best, you take something that feels overwhelming and you make it something that is accessible, and not overwhelming, and something that we can get invited into and just say, okay, I understand this a little bit more deeply than maybe I did before. So I just have to thank you for doing that hard work. I know it was hard work
Yes,
for
thank you.
sure. And do you have any resources or anything, once someone reads The Dreamer that, they can kind of take that reading further? I would love to know if you have anything on your website or anything like that.
Yeah, I think there's lots of free resources on my website. One of the things that I'll post, I had it available for the pre-orders, but I'm going to transfer it over to be available for anyone now, is that I've created a 4-day family guide called Ticket to Afghanistan. And so that's just basically a way to kind of walk through in a little more deeper way to learn even more about Afghan culture in kind of fun, family-friendly ways where you can kind of learn a little bit more and have more interactive things. One time there's a movie to watch, sometimes it's this activity to do, but there's these different ways that you can kind of step in as a family, questions to talk about together. And then they always end with ways that you can pray together as a family. So I think that's kind of a fun way to go deeper after having read the book together to foster more prayer and kind of a deeper love for this part of the world that God has for it as well. And then also on my site, there's on my blog specifically, there's prayer guides for families for different world religions and for Islam. And on there, there's even in that I list like books that are international kidlit, some books that you could check out and read with your families that are great kind of starting points for Islam. And so, and one of the ones is on there is and you might have listened to it already, but is the I Am Malala. There's a young readers edition of that. My family, we listen to that as an audiobook, but they have young reader and even younger reader versions of it. So they have all versions for all ages now. But things like that, that there's other resources that you can continue to dive deeper into understanding and as a family, kind of kid-friendly ways and just fun activities to do together. And then just always prayer prompts to kind of help spark ideas for how prayer might look for this part of the world or that culture.
Well, I know that all of that will be so helpful, and I love that people can kind of continue that journey of learning even outside of the book. Well, obviously, we have alluded and talked about the fact that it is a series, and we are really excited to begin work on the second book soon. But I would love to hear just a little bit from you if you want to give us a little teaser of what that second book will be about.
Yeah, so I'm excited for the second book. It's going to be based in Sri Lanka this time, and we're going to be kind of learning about Buddhism. And so I'm excited for this book because we're going to be dealing in Sri Lanka. There's going to be one of the other characters is actually going to be a Christian that the boys meet in this culture. And so I think it's going to be a real sweet opportunity to kind of bring readers into this world of Buddhism and learn about it, but also the mission that the boys get is called they're asked to mend two at odds. So we're going to get a little bit into some of the conflict and in this book a little more so than we would have in the first one because we've already laid the foundation. So I'm sort of excited. There's more to do with the plot in this one because we've already laid the foundation for how everything works in this world. So it's really fun to kind of dive in and kind of get to bring more characters this time, I think, in the story than I did in the first one. So I'm excited for this. I think it'll be kind of a fun journey. It's been more of me having to really lean into even more research. I've been to Sri Lanka twice, but this is a really fun one. I think I'm excited to see how the Lord uses this. But yeah, Sri Lanka is the next stop, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Wow, well, I can't wait just to see all of the wonderful things that you have planned for this book. I'm really excited that we, of course, get to get the privilege of getting to work on that with you. So yeah, I can't wait, and I think it'll be such an invaluable resource for people.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Well, Jenny, thank you so much. I mean, again, just from Calipress Publishing, we are just so grateful that you trusted us with your book, with the first two books of your series. It is such a gift. We don't take it lightly. I mean, especially just sitting here listening to you talk, you have so much wisdom, and just such a gift for communicating what you're passionate about with this world and just bringing kids along in missions and that heart for the nations. I mean, it's just contagious listening to you talk. I just feel like I need to get off here and go pray immediately. And I'm just so grateful. It's just such a gift, and I am just celebrating you today. And again, I know it is just the beginning of a journey. And I know God just has so many wonderful plans for your beautiful book and for your series. And I think that it will just be such an adventure for you and for the children that get to follow along as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, I hope so too. I'm excited to see how the Lord will use it. And again, I'm just honored to get to partner with Calla Press. You guys have been just a delight to work with and really love your guys' hearts to bring beautiful books into the world that are biblically based. So it's an honor to partner together. And I'm so excited to get these books into the hands of young readers and their families.
Yeah, me too. And if you are listening back and you haven't already purchased your copy of The Dreamer, you can go do that. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and on the CalaPress website, of course. I don't know how I could forget our own website. Um, but yeah, it's such a wonderful book, so worthwhile, and I think you'll have a really wonderful time diving into this world. But yeah, thank you so much, Jenny.
Thanks. So wonderful to get to celebrate together.